The mountains of West Virginia have always kept secrets. They rise in silence above the hollows and creek beds, above the rusted mailboxes and the gravel driveways that wind back into the trees, and they hold whatever has happened in their shadow with a kind of ancient indifference. People who grow up in those hills learn early that the land does not give back what it takes. But sometimes, after years, after decades, after the world has moved on and the candles have burned down to nothing, the truth finds its way out of the dark anyway. It was the autumn of 2004. The leaves had already turned in Barber County, West Virginia, the red and gold burning against a sky the color of pewter. The town of Philippi, population just under 3,000, sat along the Tigard Valley River the way it always had, quiet and ordinary and deeply familiar to everyone who lived there. People knew their neighbors. They knew whose truck was whose. They noticed when something was out of place. On the morning of October 14, 2004, a young woman named Carla Jean Heston, 26 years old, a mother of two, a part-time cashier at the Kroger on Main Street who sang in the choir at First Baptist Church, did not show up for her shift. By afternoon, her children were waiting at the school gate with no one to collect them. By evening, the people who loved her were standing on her front porch, knocking on a door that no one answered. The swing in the yard hung perfectly still in the October air. The toy truck her son had left on the porch steps lay on its side, wheels turning slightly in the wind. Carla Jean Heston had vanished. And the question that would haunt Barber County for the next 18 years was not simply where she had gone, but who had been the last person to see her alive. Carla Jean Heston was not a woman who disappeared. That was the first thing everyone said, in those initial hours when her absence still felt like a misunderstanding, a crossed wire, a simple mistake that would resolve itself before nightfall. She was grounded. She was responsible. She had two children, Marcus, age 7, and little Delia, who had just turned 5 in September and whose birthday cake Carla had baked from scratch in the small kitchen of their rented house on Coulter Street. She was, by every account, a woman who showed up. Carla had grown up in Billington, about 12 miles east of Philippi, the second of 4 children born to Raymond and Doris Alderman. Her father worked at the paper mill. Her mother cleaned houses on the north side of town. Carla had been a decent student, not remarkable in the academic sense, but remembered vividly by her high school teachers for her steadiness, her warmth, and her particular gift for making people feel seen. She played softball. She helped organize the bake sales. She remembered birthdays. At 20, she had married Dale Heston, a 31-year-old mechanic who had recently moved to Barber County from Roanoke, Virginia. Dale was tall, broad-shouldered, quiet in a way that some people found reassuring and others found difficult to read. He worked at Gatson's Auto Repair on the edge of town. He drove a dark green Ford pickup. He did not attend church. They had Marcus in 2001 and Delia in 1999. The marriage had its difficulties. Neighbors on Coulter Street had heard raised voices on occasion, had seen Carla sitting alone on the porch steps late at night with a cup of coffee going cold in her hands. But these were things that people in small towns noticed quietly and filed away without comment, because the line between a rough patch and something more serious is not always clear until it is too late. On October 13, 2004, the day before she vanished, Carla had worked the morning shift at Kroger, clocking in at 7:15 and out at 1:30. Her coworker, Linda Prater, would later tell investigators that Carla had seemed tired that day, quieter than usual, but had still laughed at a joke by the deli counter and had asked Linda about her daughter's upcoming school play. Nothing that suggested crisis. Nothing that said goodbye. That afternoon, Carla picked up Marcus and Delia from Philippi Elementary. A crossing guard named Herschel Boone remembered seeing her clearly, remembered the blue wool coat she was wearing, remembered that she held Delia's hand while Marcus ran ahead to the car. He remembered that she paused at the corner and looked back toward the school for a moment, as though she had forgotten something, then shook her head and kept walking. He would think about that pause for years afterward. That evening, a neighbor named Ruth Canfield saw Carla in the backyard around 5 o'clock, pushing Delia on the swing while Marcus rode his bicycle in circles on the cracked concrete path. The ordinary choreography of an ordinary Wednesday afternoon. Ruth waved. Carla waved back. Ruth would later tell the Barber County Sheriff's Department that Carla had smiled, a real smile, she insisted, not a performance, and that the children had been laughing. Dale Heston told investigators he had arrived home from the garage at approximately 6:45 that evening. He said Carla had made dinner. He believed it was spaghetti, though he was not entirely certain, and that they had eaten as a family and put the children to bed around 8:30. He said they had watched some television after that. He said they had gone to sleep around 10. He said nothing unusual had happened. The next morning, Thursday, October 14th, Carla Jean Heston did not appear for her 7:15 shift at Kroger. When Linda Prater called the house at 7:30, Dale answered. He said Carla had already left. He said she must be on her way. She never arrived. By noon, the assistant manager at Kroger had called the house twice more with no answer. By 2 o'clock, Marcus and Delia were standing at the school gate with their backpacks, waiting. The principal called the number on file. Dale Heston answered again. He said there must be a miscommunication. He said he would come. He came. But when Ruth Canfield walked over to the Heston house at 6 that evening to ask if everything was all right, Dale met her at the door with his arms crossed and told her that Carla had taken off. He said she did that sometimes. He said not to worry about it. Ruth Canfield stood on that porch and looked at Dale Heston's face, and something, she could not name it precisely, not then, made the hair on the back of her neck rise slowly, one follicle at a time. She went home and called the Barber County Sheriff's Department. The dispatcher logged the call at 6:17 p.m. The swing in the yard hung still. The toy truck lay on its side. Deputy Aaron Wicks was the first officer to arrive at the Heston residence on Coulter Street that Thursday evening. He pulled up at 6:49 p.m., just as the last light was leaving the sky above the ridge. He noted later in his incident report that the house appeared orderly from the outside, curtains drawn, porch light on, Dale Heston's green pickup parked in the driveway at a slight angle, as though it had been pulled in quickly. Dale met him at the door before he could knock. Deputy Wicks described the encounter in his notes. Subject appeared calm, no signs of distress, maintained eye contact throughout, spoke in even, measured tones. When I asked where his wife might have gone, he shrugged and said, "She takes off sometimes. You know how women get." When I asked when he had last seen her, he said that morning. When I pressed him on the timeline, he adjusted, said the previous evening. He did not seem troubled by the discrepancy. The adjustment from morning to evening was small. It could have been confusion. It could have been tiredness. Deputy Wicks noted it and moved on. Inside, Marcus and Delia were watching television in the living room. Delia had her knees pulled to her chest and did not look up when Deputy Wicks entered. Marcus stared at the screen with the particular blankness of a child who is trying very hard not to look at something. Wicks asked Dale a series of standard questions. Had Carla taken anything with her, clothing, luggage, her purse? Dale said he didn't know, he hadn't checked. Wicks asked if he could look at the bedroom. Dale paused just a beat, just a fraction of a second longer than would be natural, and then nodded and stepped aside. The bedroom was tidy. The bed was made. Carla's purse, a brown leather shoulder bag, was on the nightstand. Her wallet was inside it. Her driver's license was inside the wallet. Her house keys were on the hook by the back door. A woman who had chosen to leave would not have left without her wallet. A woman who had chosen to leave would not have left without her keys. By the following morning, the Barber County Sheriff's Department had officially opened a missing person investigation into Carla Jean Heston. Sheriff Ted Mosley, a 20-year veteran of the department who knew most of his county by name, assigned Deputies Wicks and Carol Tanner to lead the initial inquiry. They began by canvassing Coulter Street, then widened their sweep to include the surrounding blocks, the routes between the Heston house and the Kroger, and the roads leading out of Philippi in every direction. The search mobilized quickly. Volunteers from First Baptist Church, people who had sung beside Carla, who had helped her decorate the fellowship hall for Christmas and Easter, began knocking on doors and walking the creek banks that same Friday afternoon. The Philippi Barber County Library put up flyers. The local radio station ran announcements every hour. A woman named Gloria Ferris, who had gone to school with Carla's older sister, organized a search party of 40 people that walked the wooded hillside above Canaan Road on Saturday morning in a light, cold rain. They found nothing. The Tigard Valley River was running high that weekend. A week of rain in the upper valley had pushed it above its banks in places. Dive teams from the state police searched a 2-mile stretch south of the Philippi covered bridge. They found an old bicycle frame, a section of chain-link fencing, and a rusted oil drum. They did not find Carla. Meanwhile, investigators were quietly building a picture of Dale Heston's movements on the night of October 13th and the morning of October 14th. Dale had told Deputy Wicks he arrived home at 6:45 p.m. on the 13th. His supervisor at Gatson's Auto Repair, a man named Bobby Gatson, confirmed that Dale had clocked out at 6:09. The drive from the garage to Coulter Street took, at most, 12 minutes. Investigators drove it themselves, multiple times at different hours. 12 minutes, perhaps 15 if every light caught you wrong. Meaning Dale Heston had arrived home no later than 6:25. Dale had said 6:45. 20 minutes, an insignificant gap perhaps, or 20 minutes that could not be accounted for. Bobby Gatson offered one other detail that investigators noted carefully. On the afternoon of October 13th, Dale had used the garage's commercial pressure washer for approximately 40 minutes after his shift officially ended. Gatson had not thought much of it at the time. Employees sometimes cleaned their personal vehicles on slow afternoons. But when Wicks asked what Dale had been washing, Gatson thought about it and said he believed it was the bed of his truck. Investigators asked to examine the truck. Dale declined to consent to a search without a warrant. Those who knew him said Dale Heston had always been hard to read. Former coworkers at the garage described him as competent, quiet, not unfriendly, but not the kind of man who invited closeness. He didn't talk about his family much, Bobby Gatson told investigators. Didn't talk about much of anything personal, really. A man named Terrell Ames, who had worked alongside Dale for 2 years, remembered that Dale had once said, in passing, that Carla had a mouth on her when she wanted to. He had said it without apparent anger, which Terrell found stranger somehow than if he had said it bitterly. Deputies whispered quietly among themselves about the composure. Dale had not cried. He had not asked investigators what they were doing to find his wife. He had not stood on the porch calling her name into the dark the way the movies suggested grieving spouses did. He had taken the children to school on Friday morning and returned home and watched television. Ruth Canfield, watching from her window, saw him mow the lawn that Saturday afternoon. Investigators circled. They interviewed Carla's family, her parents Raymond and Doris, her sisters Beverly and Tammy, who were frantic with grief and fury, who pointed at Dale with shaking fingers and said things that investigators carefully recorded and just as carefully kept from the public. They interviewed Carla's friends, her coworkers, her pastor. No one had any indication that she had planned to leave. No one could name a person she might have gone to. Her car, a 1999 Pontiac Grand AM, was found parked 2 blocks away on Maple Street, its doors unlocked, the key still in the ignition. A car does not park itself 2 blocks from home and lock itself in. Forensic teams processed both the car and the house on Coulter Street. They found trace evidence in the Pontiac fibers, a partial shoe impression on the floor mat, but nothing conclusive. The house yielded less. The bedroom, the kitchen, the back hallway had all been recently cleaned with a strong bleach solution. Deputies noted the smell when they entered. It was overwhelming, even 2 days after Carla's disappearance. Dale told investigators he cleaned regularly. The state police laboratory found that the bleach application in several areas of the home was inconsistent with routine cleaning. Concentrated, deliberate, and focused on specific surfaces and corners. But without a body, without direct physical evidence linking Dale to a specific act, the investigation had no ground on which to stand. A warrant for the truck was finally obtained in late October. By then, Dale had sold it to a used car dealer in Elkins. Investigators located it and processed it extensively. They found trace biological material in the truck bed, material that had been partially but not entirely destroyed by the pressure washing. But the sample was too degraded to yield a complete DNA profile with the technology available in 2004. Too degraded, not destroyed, degraded. It was a distinction that would matter enormously 18 years later. By December of 2004, with no body, no decisive physical evidence, and no witness who could directly contradict Dale Heston's account of the evening of October 13th, the active investigation slowed to a near stop. The case was not closed. It was never technically closed, but the momentum had dissipated into paperwork and unanswered phone calls, and the grinding practicality of a small sheriff's department with limited resources and too many other demands. Carla Jean Heston remained officially a missing person. The flyers faded on the community board at the library. The volunteers returned to their lives. The search parties dissolved. Somewhere in the mountains of Barber County, or beyond them, or beneath the river, or in a place that no grid search had reached, Carla was waiting. Time moves differently after a disappearance. For the people who loved Carla, the months that followed did not so much pass as accumulate, heavy and formless, like snow that will not stop falling, that buries everything without discrimination. Clears throat. Raymond and Doris Alderman aged visibly in the year after their daughter vanished. Raymond, who had been a stocky, vigorous man of 58, lost 30 pounds by the following spring. Doris stopped going to the grocery store alone. The Christmas that year, 2004, was the kind of Christmas that families in that situation all described the same way. The gifts under the tree, the food on the table, the careful effort to make it normal for the grandchildren, and beneath all of it a weight so profound that no amount of tinsel could touch it. Beverly, Carla's older sister, began making phone calls in January. She called the sheriff's department every 2 weeks, then every month, keeping a log of each conversation in a spiral notebook that she stored in a kitchen drawer alongside the utility bills. She called the state police. She called the state attorney general's office. She wrote letters to her local state delegate. Each communication yielded the same polished sympathy and the same absence of new information. Marcus and Delia remained with Dale. This was, for the Alderman family, the open wound within the wound. Carla's parents and sisters believed, not suspected, believed, that Dale Heston had done something to their daughter. They said so to investigators, to attorneys, to anyone who would listen. But belief is not evidence, and without evidence the courts had no mechanism to separate the children from their father. A custody hearing in early 2005 resulted in a finding that Dale was a fit parent and that the children would remain in his care. The Aldermans were granted supervised visitation. Dale moved the children to Clarksburg in Harrison County by the summer of 2005. He found work at a factory there. He enrolled Marcus and Delia in a new school. He built, with deliberate efficiency, the architecture of a new, ordinary life. Those who have ever doubted someone they love will understand something of what Beverly Alderman described in later interviews: the way certainty and uncertainty coexist, how you can know something in your bones and still be unable to make anyone else see it, how the absence of proof becomes its own particular cruelty. "I knew," Beverly would say later, simply and without elaboration. "I knew from the very first night." Marcus and Delia grew up in Clarksburg in the shadow of their mother's absence. Marcus, by middle school, had become quiet and careful in a way that his teachers noted with concern. He was not troubled in any obvious sense. He did his work. He had a few friends. He did not cause disruptions. But there was a watchfulness about him, a particular attention to exits and to the way adults' voices changed register when they thought children were not listening, that spoke of a childhood organized around vigilance. Delia drew pictures. This detail would surface years later, noted by a social worker named Patricia Oates, who conducted a routine welfare check on the household in 2007, when Delia was 8 years old. Among the pictures in Delia's room, horses, rainbows, the usual landscape of a child's imagination, was a series of drawings that Oates found striking. They depicted, over and over again, a woman with brown hair lying on the ground beside what appeared to be a dark green vehicle. The woman in every drawing had her eyes closed and her arms at her sides, very still, very flat. Oates photographed the drawings and included them in her welfare report. The report was filed. The drawings were noted. No immediate action was taken. Delia, when asked about the pictures, said she was drawing her mother sleeping. The years passed. Dale remarried in 2009, a woman named Sandra who worked as a dental hygienist and who, by all accounts, had no knowledge of the circumstances surrounding Carla's disappearance. They had a child together in 2011. Marcus, by then 14, began spending increasing amounts of time at the Alderman's house whenever he could arrange it. Beverly noticed that he did not speak about his father unless directly asked, and that when he did speak about him, he chose his words with a care that seemed like practiced self-protection. In 2010, the state police's forensic laboratory in Charleston received new funding to re-examine cold case physical evidence using advances in DNA technology that had not been available in 2004. A cold case unit analyst named Gregory Harmon was assigned to review a backlog of old samples. Among them was the degraded biological material recovered from the bed of Dale Heston's sold truck, material that had been sitting in cold storage for 6 years, waiting for the science to catch up with what it had been trying to say. The new analysis extracted a partial DNA profile. It was not conclusive. It was not nothing. Harmon flagged the case file and sent a memo to the Barber County Sheriff's Department. The memo acknowledged that the partial profile was insufficient for a definitive match, but noted that it was consistent with a female source and recommended the case be reviewed for any additional biological evidence that might allow for a comparison sample. The memo landed on the desk of the newly elected sheriff, a former deputy named Craig Elmore, who had been a young officer in 2004 and who remembered the Heston case with the clarity that certain things burned themselves into memory. Elmore read the memo twice, then opened the original case file, which had not been touched in 4 years. He read Deputy Wick's original notes. He read the forensic reports. He read the observation about the bleach. He read the note about the pressure washer. He read about the 20-minute gap in Dale Heston's timeline. He set the file on the corner of his desk and left his hand resting on top of it for a long moment. Then he picked up the phone. The call that broke open the Heston case did not come from a laboratory or a law enforcement agency. It came from Marcus Heston, who was 19 years old in the fall of 2012, and who walked into the Barber County Sheriff's Department on the morning of November 3rd of that year with the specific, deliberate composure of someone who has spent a very long time preparing to do something terrifying. Clear's throat. He asked to speak with Sheriff Craig Elmore. Elmore was in a meeting when Marcus arrived. He came out immediately when his deputy told him who was waiting. He later described the moment in an interview with a state police investigator. "I looked at that boy and I saw Carla. I had known her not well, not personally, but the way you know people in a small town, and he looked just like her. He had her eyes." Marcus was calm. He sat across from Elmore and a detective named Warren Baston, and he did not cry, and he did not raise his voice. He spoke in the measured, almost formal cadence of someone reciting words he had rehearsed, and what he said would be entered into the case record and referenced in every subsequent legal proceeding. "I need to tell you what I remember," Marcus said. "I need to tell you what happened the night my mother disappeared." He was 7 years old in October of 2004. He had told investigators at the time that he did not know anything, that he had been asleep. He had been taught, he said, to say that. He had been told, specifically and clearly, what to say and what not to say, and he had been 7 years old and afraid, and he had said what he was told. But Marcus Heston had not forgotten. He described waking up in the night. He did not know the precise time, but it was dark and the house was quiet in a specific way, the kind of quiet that wakes a child before they understand why. He had gone to the hallway to get a glass of water. Through the window at the end of the hall, which faced the backyard, he had seen his father at the bed of the green truck in the driveway. He had seen his father lifting something. He had seen the shape of something wrapped in the blue tarp that his father kept folded in the garage. He said he had gone back to his room and gotten under the blankets and put his pillow over his head. He said he had never stopped seeing it. Clear's throat. Marcus Heston's statement did not, by itself, constitute direct forensic evidence of a crime. What it did was fundamentally restructure the investigative framework of the case and provide the predicate for a renewed and substantially more resourceful inquiry. Sheriff Elmore contacted the West Virginia State Police immediately and requested the involvement of the Cold Case Unit. Within 48 hours, Detective Sergeant Andrea Pruitt, a 12-year veteran of the state police with specialized training in homicide investigation, had taken joint lead of the reopened case. On November 9, 2012, investigators executed a search of a property in Upshur County, approximately 22 miles from the original Heston residence on Coulter Street, that Dale Heston had briefly rented in October and November of 2004, following a period when, records showed, he had been seen driving on rural routes in that direction on at least 2 occasions, documented by a state road department employee who had logged passing vehicles as part of a routine infrastructure survey. That survey document had been sitting in a state archive since 2004, unretrieved, because no one had known to look for it. On the second day of excavation of a wooded area on the property, November 10, 2012. A Sunday, under a sky that was the same pewter gray that it had been on the day Carla vanished. Forensic investigators located human remains. The remains were identified through dental records within 72 hours. They were Carla Jean Heston, age 26, who had been missing for 8 years, 1 month and 27 days. The forensic pathologist's report concluded that the manner of passing was consistent with blunt force trauma. A forensic anthropologist who examined the remains noted evidence consistent with the victim having been transported in a confined horizontal position after the time of death, a positioning consistent with the bed of a pickup truck. The biological material recovered from the truck bed in 2004 was re-examined with the updated profile. The match was confirmed. Clears throat. Dale Arthur Heston was arrested on November 13, 2012, at his residence in Clarksburg. Detective Sergeant Prout and 2 Harrison County Sheriff's deputies arrived at the house at 7:22 in the morning. Sandra Heston answered the door in a bathrobe, their young son visible in the hallway behind her, and when she saw the officers, her hand went slowly to her mouth in the way that hands go to mouths when something that was feared but never named suddenly arrives at the door. Dale came out of the bedroom still buttoning his shirt. He looked at Prout and at the deputies and at the document she was holding, and his face went through a sequence that the deputies described later as first nothing, then something, then nothing again. He said, "I want a lawyer." He was placed in handcuffs on his own front porch in the cold November morning and was escorted to a waiting vehicle. A neighbor across the street paused in the process of backing out of his driveway and sat watching with the engine running, not moving, as the vehicle pulled away. The news moved through Barber County with the speed that news moves through small communities, through phone calls and text messages, through the radio and the local paper's website, through the checkout lines at the Kroger where Carla had worked, where Linda Prater stopped in the middle of scanning groceries and sat down on the floor behind her register and cried with her hands over her face. Ruth Canfield, who was 71 years old and had never moved from her house on Coulter Street, stood on her porch in the November wind when she heard, and she said nothing for a long time, and then she said quietly to no one in particular, "I knew, first night, I knew." Clears throat. The community response was precisely what it is in such cases, a mixture of grief confirmed and disbelief colliding. There were those who had believed from the beginning, who received the arrest as a terrible vindication. There were those who had known Dale Heston, had worked beside him, had been his neighbors in Clarksburg, who sat with the news and tried to reconcile the man they thought they knew with what was now being alleged, and could not accomplish this reconciliation, and were left stranded somewhere in the middle. Beverly Alderman, who had been calling the sheriff's department every month for 8 years, learned of the arrest in a phone call from Sheriff Elmore himself. She later described sitting at her kitchen table for the rest of that day, the phone in her hands, unable to stop the way her body shook, not from cold, not from fear, but from the specific physical release of something that had been held rigid inside her for 8 years, finally beginning to give way. Raymond Alderman had passed away in 2009, 3 years before the arrest, without knowing what had happened to his daughter. He had died having filed no formal complaint, having done nothing wrong, having simply been unable to outlast the silence. Doris Alderman, 81 years old and in fragile health at the time of the arrest, was told gently by Beverly. Doris sat very still for a moment and then said she wanted to go to the grave, not Carla's, not yet, but Raymond's. She wanted to tell him that they had found her. She wanted to tell him that they knew. Clears throat. Dale Arthur Heston was indicted by a Barber County grand jury on December 4, 2012, on charges of first-degree homicide and concealment of a deceased individual. His court-appointed defense attorney filed multiple pretrial motions, including a motion to suppress Marcus Heston's testimony on the grounds that it was the product of allegedly coached recollection, and a motion to challenge the admissibility of the degraded DNA evidence from the truck bed. Both motions were denied by Circuit Court Judge Harriet Lemon in rulings issued in March and April of 2013, respectively. The trial opened in October of 2013, 9 years and 1 week after Carla Jean Heston had last been seen alive. The courtroom in Philippi was filled to capacity every day of the 9-day proceeding. The Alderman family occupied the front row of the gallery on the left side, Beverly and Tammy and their husbands, Doris in a wheelchair at the end of the row. Ruth Canfield attended every day, sitting in the third row with her hands folded in her lap. Marcus Heston testified on the 4th day of the trial. He was 20 years old. He walked to the witness stand and was sworn in and sat down and looked at the prosecutor and answered every question that was put to him in the same measured, deliberate way he had spoken to Sheriff Elmore in 2012. He did not look at his father. His father sat at the defense table and watched him with an expression that the courtroom observers described variously as cold or blank or impossible to read. When the prosecutor asked Marcus to describe what he had seen through the hallway window on the night of October 13, 2004, the courtroom was absolutely silent. Marcus said carefully, "I saw my dad at the back of his truck. He was lifting something. It was wrapped in the blue tarp. He was having trouble with the weight." He paused. "I knew," he said. "I was 7, but I knew." Clears throat. Delia Heston did not testify. She had submitted a written statement that was entered into evidence through the social worker, Patricia Oates, who testified about the drawing she had documented in 2007. The woman with brown hair lying still beside the dark green vehicle, made over and over again by an 8-year-old girl who said she was drawing her mother sleeping. The forensic pathologist testified about the remains and about the evidence of blunt force trauma. The forensic anthropologist testified about the transport indicators. The state police analyst testified about the DNA comparison between the degraded truck bed sample and the reference sample taken from Carla's dental records and confirmed skeletal remains. The road department employee, retired now, living in Buckhannon, testified about his vehicle log from October 2004, about the notation he had made of a dark green Ford pickup traveling the rural route toward the Upshur County property on 2 successive evenings. The defense presented a character witness, a former coworker from Clarksburg, and challenged the DNA evidence on technical grounds and suggested that Marcus's memory had been shaped by years of contact with the Alderman family, who had, the defense argued, harbored and transmitted a bias against Dale Heston since the earliest days of Carla's disappearance. The defense attorney was competent and thorough, and the arguments were the best arguments available to make, but they were working against the accumulated weight of a decade's worth of evidence that had slowly, inexorably accrued. On October 22, 2013, after 11 hours of deliberation spread across 2 days, the jury of 8 women and 4 men returned to the courtroom and delivered a verdict of guilty on both counts. The room did not erupt in the way that television suggests courtrooms erupt. What happened was more complicated than that. Beverly grabbed her sister Tammy's hand. Doris Alderman closed her eyes and bent forward slightly and put her face in her hands, not in grief, but in the posture of someone who has been holding a weight for so long that the sudden absence of it requires a moment of physical adjustment. Across the room, someone was crying. It was not clear who. Dale Heston stood at the defense table and received the verdict with the same composure with which he had received everything: the deputies at his door, the handcuffs, the weeks of testimony. He stood straight and looked forward and gave nothing away, and it was this, perhaps more than anything else, that people would remember and discuss for years afterward. Not the evidence, not the legal arguments, but that expression. Or rather, the absence of one. He was sentenced on December 10, 2013, to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 40 years, to be served at the Mount Olive Correctional Complex in Fayette County. Judge Lemon delivered the sentence in a voice that was steady and without flourish, and before she finalized the proceedings, she paused and addressed the courtroom directly. She said, "The length of this silence was its own form of injustice. Carla Jean Heston deserved better than 8 years in the ground before anyone answered for what happened to her." The courtroom was quiet. Outside, in the November air, Beverly Alderman stood on the courthouse steps and looked at the mountains above Philippi, at the ridge line going dark against the afternoon sky, at the red and gold that was already fading from the trees. And she thought about her sister in a blue wool coat, holding a little girl's hand at a school crossing, pausing at the corner, looking back. She thought about what Herschel Boone had said, that Carla had shaken her head, as though she had forgotten something and then kept walking. Beverly had always believed that what Carla had forgotten was to be afraid. Or perhaps Beverly thought she had been afraid. Perhaps she had known, in the way that some part of us always knows, that something was already in motion that could not be stopped. Perhaps the pause at the corner was not forgetting something. Perhaps it was a last look, a last ordinary thing. The swing in the yard hung still. The toy truck lay on its side. Marcus Heston stood near his aunt on the courthouse steps. He did not speak. He stood and looked at the mountains the way his mother had looked at the corner, and whatever he was thinking remained his own. Closing. The case of Carla Jean Heston is, in the end, a story about time, about what time costs, about the 18 years that stretched between the night a child looked through a hallway window and the morning he walked into a sheriff's office and said, "I need to tell you what I remember." About the 8 years her family spent calling departments and filing reports and driving past that empty house on Coulter Street and knowing what they knew without the world acknowledging it. About the years Delia spent drawing the same picture over and over, the woman with brown hair, lying still, in the only language available to a 5-year-old who was trying to say something that no one was ready to hear. Clears throat. True justice is rarely swift. It is often ugly, partial, and bittersweet in the way that all hard-won things are bittersweet. It does not undo what has been undone. It does not bring Carla back to the choir at First Baptist Church, or to the school gate at 3 o'clock, or to the backyard where her children laughed in the October light. It does not return the years to Raymond Alderman, who went to his grave without knowing. It does not give back the childhood that Marcus and Delia spent in the shadow of something unspoken, learning to survive in the presence of the person responsible for their mother's absence. What it gives back is something harder to name, something closer to acknowledgement, the world seeing what it had failed to see quickly enough and saying, "Yes, we see it now, it happened, it mattered." Carla Jean Heston was 26 years old. She sang in the choir. She baked birthday cakes from scratch. She held her daughter's hand at street crossings and waved to her neighbor and smiled, a real smile, not a performance, in her own backyard in the late afternoon of an ordinary October day. She deserved a long life. She deserved to see her children grow. She deserved to be remembered as something more than a cold case, a file number, a cautionary chapter in the history of a small county in the mountains of West Virginia. She was more than that. She is more than that. And the mountains, which keep their secrets for as long as they choose to, eventually gave hers back. Clear's throat. If this story mattered to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Share the episode. Someone somewhere may still be waiting to be heard.